Program Development Officer here in the Public Affairs section at the U.S. Embassy. I'd like to welcome all of you to the Embassy. For many, I know this may be the first time in the auditorium, since this is our first time having these type of programs in the auditorium, so I'd like to welcome you. First, I'd like to just quickly give you some basic ground rules. The restrooms are outside. You're free to use your cell phones and tablets in here. Pictures are okay. We're live streaming, not live streaming, we're recording today's program as well, so please take note of that. And the views expressed today, again, are the speaker's own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the US government, even though we have this great seal in the back. And they don't also necessarily reflect the views of the organizations that these speakers represent as well. But we'd like to have a lively and wonderful discussion. I'd like to also, if you're interested in future programs, please consider just following our Embassy Facebook or Twitter. You can just Google US Embassy Tokyo, and that should come up. And so before we get started, I'd like to just give some brief background on our relationship with Pacific Forum. So we've been doing these programs now for a number of years, and we've modified the formats for a while, but we've settled on this sort of conference model, which happened for the past 2 days in Tokyo on Monday and Friday. And I'd like to start by introducing our moderator, Brad Glosserman, who is the senior advisor for Pacific Forum in Honolulu, but he's also based out of Tokyo. And so with that, Brad, please, onegaishimasu. Thank you.
You can vlog, that's okay. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everybody, for coming out today. It's a pleasure. My name is Brad Glosserman. I'm the moderator and be the director of the program for the next 90 minutes. I have one request. Mike says if you're going to take pictures, that's fine. Please get my good side. Although it's not clear if I actually have my good side. As Mike said, this panel follows 2 days of conversations with 40 experts, officials from around the region, to talk about the meaning and the economic dimensions of a free and open Indo-Pacific. About 17 months ago, in October of 2017, the United States Secretary of State at that time first mentioned the concept of a free and open Indo-Pacific, which has since emerged as the organizing principle of American foreign policy towards Asia and India, in the Indian area, Indian and Pacific Ocean. A couple of months later, December of 2017, the Trump administration published its national security strategy, whose real defining concept was that the world had entered an era of great power competition. While there was, and has always, will likely always be, a military component of that competition. In fact, in Asia, and I think for most of the world, that competition is likely to be, or will be, predominantly economic. And in Asia, at least, the chief competitor for the United States is going to be China. Since then, the United States government and its partners, Japan in particular, but Australia as well, India, other like-minded countries, have tried to flesh out and explain the meaning of the free and open Indo-Pacific, sometimes called the FOIP, F-O-I-P. It is not yet clear precisely what that includes in all of its multi-dimensions and initiatives. Last summer, for example, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo offered, I think, one of the first real assessments of the economic dimension of the free and open Indo-Pacific. In many ways, I think, as a response to criticism by people like myself or other analysts of international affairs that felt as though there hadn't really been sufficient attention to detail and it really wasn't clear what we were talking about. So there have been, since then, the effort at the instigation of the United States government, the various embassies and State Departments all over the region, and in fact around the world, attempts to explain and understand and reach more depth and complexity and nuance to this idea of a free and open Indo-Pacific. And that is what we were doing for the last 2 days in this very room, discussing the economic dimensions with a really, I think, stellar cast of experts, officials, and otherwise just smart people, business people as well, which is an important dimension of this, to try to understand what exactly it is we're talking about. So after those discussions, which concluded this afternoon, about noon, we hold this panel. We have three, I think, outstanding participants to give us different perspectives, both in terms of the geographic approach, or the national perspective that they bring, as well as from their functional interests. And so now, I'd like to turn to them, each providing 10 minutes of remarks. Our panelists are Jay Nakano, who is a former colleague of mine from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a senior researcher in the energy security policy, and just one of the smartest folks I know on regional security issues. Mr. Do Huynh, from Hanoi, a lecturer in public policy at the Fulbright University of Vietnam. And finally, Ikiri Gata, who another longtime colleague of mine who deserves great credit for putting up with me for many years, at Pacific Forum, who is now a visiting professor at the Center for Rulemaking Strategies at Tom University, the association, the organization with which I am also affiliated. So now, I turn to Jane to offer us her thoughts on the topic. Please, Jane.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, Brad, and also thank you to the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo for welcoming me back. I was here with the UAE Tokyo office more than 15 years ago. It's nice to be back here. So, the region, the Indo-Pacific, has become a center of global energy demand growth in the recent years, very much driven by the population growth and also the economic growth. Obviously, China has been a big story as the energy demand, energy consuming economy. But also the Southeast Asia is a major region in terms of the demand growth, and Southeast Asia and South Asia together are have been raising their profiles, if you will, in the global energy system. And for example, the Southeast Asia's energy demand is forecast to grow by almost 2/3, about 60% by 2040, as the regional economy triples in size. But this demand growth, though, in turn, will make them a lot more energy import dependent because their indigenous fossil fuel resources are fast being consumed. So there's an energy security challenge or dimension to their economic growth. Moreover, energy access remains to be a challenge for some time in this region, even though there has been a major improvement in this situation. For example, about 1/10 of Southeast Asia's population are estimated to remain without electricity. And also India has estimate of 300 million people that are without modern source of energy. In the meantime, though, if we shift our focus to Washington, we have the administration that has put energy at the center of its foreign policy making, as well as domestic policy. Boosting energy exports has become a key way for the Trump administration to create jobs and to grow the national economy. Thanks to shale revolution, the U.S. now has oil and gas production that is very strong, and that has helped strengthen the U.S. economy as well as the sense of energy security at home by reducing import dependence. Another key feature of the Trump administration, as it relates to the theme of the conference, is that the economic security has become a main portion of the national security. In these two contexts, namely, it should come as no big surprise that the energy has emerged as a key element in the economic agenda under the Trump administration's free and open Indo-Pacific vision. In particular, Asia EDGE, EDGE stands for Enhancing Development and Growth Through Energy, is an initiative that aims to strengthen energy security and promote energy access across the Indo-Pacific by growing regional markets and boosting energy exports by the US, such as natural gas. And the production of natural gas, I've already mentioned a little bit, but is growing quite nicely. In 2018, the output jumped by about 10% compared to the year before. And we have had a number of LNG export terminals that are being built. By the end of this year, the capacity is to double to be about 60 million tons per annum. And then by 2020, the United States is to supply about half of new global LNG export capacity. There's mutual interest between, I guess, Southeast Asia and South Asia that are energy hungry, if you will, and the United States that has lots of natural energy resources now. But infrastructure is still lacking in Southeast Asia to fully realize the potential, sort of a natural potential marriage, if you will. For example, Southeast Asia alone requires an estimated $2.1 trillion to meet its energy investment needs by 2040. And that includes some investment potential for natural gas supply infrastructure, as well as power sector, both generation, transmission, and distribution facilities, infrastructure. And but this has not gone unnoticed. Actually, China has been playing a very active role in Indo-Pacific. Since 2003, China has poured roughly half of its about $140 billion global investment in power generation sector of Southeast Asia. And moreover, China has spent roughly a quarter of its overseas nuclear project financing last year in Asia. But China has a very different model from what we have in the US and what you have here in Japan. So in many ways, I think US public policy makers have recognized that it's quite difficult to go up against and meet this challenge that China presents in sort of an identical manner. So the US administration is now forming partnerships with several countries that also recognize how improving energy security and access in the Indo-Pacific can also advance their own geostrategic and commercial objectives. Japan is our key ally in this endeavor. Under Japan-US Energy Partnership, known as JUSEP, the two governments have identified LNG, high efficiency, low emissions coal-fired power technology, as well as CCS, carbon capture and sequestration, and these areas for cooperation. Moreover, aligning its energy economic agenda with Japan's $10 billion investment pledge for developing LNG projects in Asia, the U.S. administration seeks to leverage the initial funding it has of about $113 million for the economic initiatives, including Asia Edge. Another key development in the U.S. has been the passage of the so-called BUILD Act that was signed into law in October 2018 that essentially modernizes the U.S. development finance capacity and sharpens the strategic value of U.S. foreign assistance. It does a number of different things, but probably the top sort of feature is that the spending count is to increase by, is to double, but it is to become operationalized by the October of this year, which is the start of the U.S. fiscal year. And the synergy is clearly present between the U.S. gas resource wealth and Japan's interest in promoting high-quality infrastructure, including energy infrastructure. Japan is well positioned to utilize its U.S. import expertise as well as LNG plant engineering expertise to help expand the reach of U.S. LNG, which in turn enhances Japan's energy security and also facilitates openness and competition in LNG trade in Indo-Pacific. Indeed, I argue that there have been a series of high-level statements from both Washington and Tokyo since last summer when Secretary Pompeo launched the economic vision under FOIP that emphasized the two governments' commitment to promoting openness, competition, and transparency in energy trade and investment activities in this region. These are key enablers of regional stability and prosperity in Indo-Pacific. U.S. LNG is also helping lower the economic hurdle to switch fuel switch away from coal, which many of us are aware is a higher carbon-emitting source of energy. For example, coal to gas switch accounted for about 20% of the gas consumption growth last year globally. But I argue that the U.S.-Japan energy cooperation under the FOIP can and should go beyond LNG. As the regional energy consumption growth is anticipated to propel a significant rise in the greenhouse gas emissions, I think these regional economies are prime markets for clean and renewable energy projects. And I think this is where both the U.S. and Japanese business have strength in innovation and also equipment and components as well. In conclusion, I think the full-fledged support to a clean energy transition is what I think would make the FOIP's energy infrastructure and energy vision something that would actually have enduring effect. Something that could actually stay beyond any particular administration back in Washington. If it succeeds in listening to the needs of the region, the Southeast Asia and South Asia, and approach these sort of infrastructure developments as a system issue, not just here's a fuel and how does it fit into the puzzle. No, the other way around. Look at the whole picture. Look at the energy system of these individual economies and perhaps the region, and then help identify where what makes best sense, but not in terms of just how cheap or how affordable, but how sustainable for the mutual benefit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane. I now turn to Dr. Joe Nguyen from the Fulbright University of Hanoi, who will offer us a Vietnamese perspective on FOIP and engagement of Japan in the United States.
Okay, thank you very much, Russ, and thank you everyone. This is the first time for me in Japan. I am very impressed that Tokyo very well organized, everything looks very good. But one thing I think should be improved, so there should be more smiles here. So I would like to bring a little bit smile here for you to remember my name. My name is really easy to remember. You win. This is my name. Okay, my story about the tale of Vietnam, opening and development. So, if you look at the situation of Vietnam in the late 1980s, it's around in the bottom. It's ranking of about 200 countries around the world. Right now, sometimes it is in the middle, and a bit in the high end of the middle, not below end. The growth in Vietnam in the last 30 years is great. It's just behind China. And the poverty reduction, just think about that. In 1990, it's 52%. Right now, only 2%. It's really impressive. And look at the open of Vietnam economy. Right now, if you look at the country with about 20 million people, the export plus import is about 200% of GDP. It is the highest in the world. So if you look at the market of Vietnam, all this country we export and import a lot from US, China, Japan, Europe, and so on and so forth. And if we look at back to the history, Vietnam were in undesirable spotlight. So just look at that, we have problems. In fact, we have fight with 4 of the 5 members of the UN Security Council. We have the 1,000 years with China, 100 years with France, American wars, and Russia helped us to destroy the country in 10 years. So what would we do in the situation of Vietnam? We try to confront with the weak guys or try to compromise. And fortunately, I think Vietnam choose our way to work with other countries to bring good for Vietnam. But I would like to bring the story of Vietnam to see that I think for countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, and other countries can bring the good thing for our world. So when just look at since 1975, when optimism really high, when we think just end the war, and then we try to run by ourselves in the other world. It means the socialism world, and we fail. And after 10 years, we think to another way, to go to global economy. So for 10 years with the central planning model, and we try to build an economy with one central government, and then we cannot do it. And we look at back to the past a little bit. So with the French 100 years, the French in fact helped us to build some kind of modern administrative system with the feudal plus a little bit. And with the American war, in fact at that time, Vietnam tried to import 2 models from the world. In the south, the democratic system, and in the north, the central planning system, and both failed completely. And then when we try to run the model, the country by ourselves, and we fail, what would we do? In the 1986, we call đổi mới, so it means renovation. What happened? So it's simple. In this case, when we look at 3 pillars, the market, the government, and the community. In this case, the government tried to do less and let everything for the market to do more and bring to the role of the community. And in terms of internal reforms, we try to give in fact at that time give the land to the farmer. And just over 1 year, Vietnam from the imported food become the exporting one. Only 1 year in 1989. And after that, right now we bring a lot of business enterprise. For example, right now, nearly 1 million enterprise from nothing in the late 1980s. And in terms of external relationship, we open to the world. We establish the relationship with other countries, especially the key one is with the US in the 1995. So you can see from 1995 and 2019, when the second summit, the Hanoi summit, bring President Trump and Kim Jong-un to Hanoi with, I think it means that Vietnam have played a role in the world now. And then, so what Vietnam have learned from history. So in terms of internal development, we try to reframe the roles of the government. It means reduce the role of the government. And then try to liberalize the market force, just less market business, do more. And we become more careful with copying the external model. Because when we try to copy them quickly and then we fail. For external relations, we choose 2 things. The first one, natural policy, and to avoid choosing sides. So it means on the one or the other side. So if we look at the relationship, the external relationship of Vietnam right now, it looks pretty good. And then one thing we discussed in the forum that I think the situation of Vietnam is very sensitive. For example, if Canada only next to the US and Vietnam next to China and have relationship with other countries, we cannot choose one or the other side. And from our history, so that Vietnam shouldn't choose sides. So that is why we do we have done quite good job from last 30 years. And then, right now, I think if look at, some more specific about the roles of external financing for Vietnam development. Since we open a lot of capital and business come into Vietnam. If we look at in terms of investment capital, right now from FDI, foreign invested capital, it account about a quarter or a fifth of the total investment. And if we look at the ODA or something like that, it accounts for a third of the total government's investment. So it means that in combination, it accounts for about a third of total investment in Vietnam. So if we look at the combination, so Brad, I think really impressive about the graph that I think Japan account for 15% of FDI, account for a quarter of ODA. So in this case, if we look at, I think, the role of Japan in Vietnam, so and we look at the role of Japan in other Asian countries, it's a lot. But one problem I see is that I think only bilateral relationship. Japan go to Vietnam to establish relationship. Japan go to Indonesia and other countries. But with the Indo-Pacific initiative here, and if we look at in the future, from my viewpoint, Japan should play a bigger role in the multi-bilateral. It's not multilateral. It's not bilateral. In this case, so if we look at that situation and we bring the role of Japan become, I think, more significant, and we try to involve other countries, and especially with the country with around maybe 50 to 100 or over 100 million people like Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, or something like that, we would bring a better region. So it means that we try to build a free and open Indo-Pacific instead of some very divided and a lot of conflicts here. In the end, my message is that I think if we look at in the situation of Indo-Pacific, there are two things we need to consider. The first one, try to bring a more significant role of Japan and try to include, I think, a number of countries to try to build our region to become freer and more open. This is my presentation. Thank you a lot.
Thank you very much, Lynn. And our third speaker is Akira Gata, my colleague at the Center for Rulemaking Strategies. And Akira, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think we had a great summary of the Indo-Pacific from the US point of view and then from Vietnam's point of view. So my presentation is going to focus on Japan's point of view. Now, the Japanese government has been using the phrase the Indo-Pacific strategies for a while now, but something happened during last year. About around November of 2018, the Japanese government stopped using the word Indo-Pacific strategy. Now we call it Indo-Pacific vision. Why is this? Well, this change is due to the sensitivities surrounding the word strategy to other actors in the region. For example, from these presentations, you can understand that people from ASEAN countries or folks from India all understand that both Pacific Ocean and Indian Ocean is now a single geostrategic theater. However, for example, Indonesia has their own conception of what Indo-Pacific strategy should be. But they really stress the notion of ASEAN centrality, that ASEAN should be central to the decision-making of anything that deals with this Indo-Pacific concept. And India also emphasizes the notion of inclusivity, basically saying that all states in the region should be included in this Indo-Pacific region. So basically, what both of these countries are in essence referring to is exactly the same point, and that was what Yuan was talking about. That they don't want to choose sides. They don't want to choose between US and China, between the Indo-Pacific and BRI, or Belt and Road Initiative, Itaijo. And of course, from the Chinese point of view, the word strategy, Senryaku, has a Chinese character that means war, so it really has a negative connotation. Now, yes, words do matter, and yes, phrases matter. But I think that this change in the phrasing of the Japanese government basically came from this need to accommodate the views of these regional actors, meaning that there seems to be no qualitative differences in the actual policies taken by Japan under the rubric of the Indo-Pacific vision compared to the Indo-Pacific strategies. In other words, I don't think there was any sense of watering down or downgrading of the concept. And if anything, the policy track record shows that Japan's Indo-Pacific vision has been making progress in the last couple of years, or last couple of months, sorry. Now, for Japan, the economic aspect of the Indo-Pacific is, of course, the quality infrastructure investment. Quality here implies sustainability of debt, reliable construction, whether the investment is helping the local economy, or high standards of worker safety, among many other issues. In short, I think that Japan strives to put forward a fair infrastructure investment that could be a model for future infrastructure investment in comparison to China's BRI, which has often resulted in a debt trap for most of the countries, or that all of the money ends up with Chinese workers working on these projects. Now, in terms of the economic leg of this Indo-Pacific strategy, there is also a burgeoning trilateral cooperation among the Japanese government, US government, and Australian government on infrastructure investment in Asia. As Jane mentioned, the US has recently passed the BUILD Act last year, which will in essence result in OPIC being upgraded to USIDFC. This is US International Development Finance Corporation, which would end up doubling its investment capacity from $29 billion to $60 billion. This USIDFC will cooperate with the Japanese bank JBIC and Export Finance and Insurance Corporation from Australia to basically cooperate in various infrastructure development in the Indo-Pacific. Now, when you hear the actual numbers of 60 billion, or a couple more billion from JBIC and Australian government, the amount of investment seems very small compared to what Chinese counterparts are offering. However, the aim of this trilateral government cooperation is to basically use government funds to lure in these private equities in, to get the private sector involved, so that we can match some of these Chinese investments. Now, given the vast amount of infrastructure needs that exist in the Indo-Pacific region, these are really important. These investments are really important because even if let's say that Vietnam wants to have a certain investment project and China offers, and then the Japan, US, Australia, and TRILAC offers an investment program, and let's say Vietnam ends up choosing the Chinese side. This mere act of offering them a choice, offering them an alternative to Chinese investment actually helps them because it gives them the leverage to negotiate with China to make sure that they have a better deal, a more fair deal, a more transparent deal. Now, one issue that I think Japan and the US must deal with regards to the Indo-Pacific vision is that, to me, it seems like the two countries have a little bit of difference with regards to how much we are willing to cooperate with China. The 2018 National Defense Strategy of the United States has basically identified China as a strategic competitor that uses, and I quote, predatory economics to intimidate neighbors while militarizing features in the South China Sea, and that it continues to pursue a military modernization program that seeks Indo-Pacific regional hegemony in the near term and displacement of the US to achieve global preeminence in the future. This is pretty damning. From the economic aspect, the trade war between US and China is still ongoing. And recently, the United States government has really taken a hard stance towards China's intellectual property theft through basically naming and shaming. And just to give you one recent example, the Department of Justice revealed these documents showing that Huawei, the Chinese telecommunication company, was giving bonuses to their employees that brought in proprietary information from other companies. Furthermore, the current Trump administration is increasing its oversight of foreign investments into the United States through CFIUS, that's the investment screening mechanism in the US, as well as updates to ECRA, Export Control Reform Act, to define what emerging and foundational technologies exist that will newly be subject to additional scrutiny when investment by or export to foreign countries are being considered. Now, while Japan is on the same page with the US in terms of security aspects, I think that Japan is more forward-leaning with regards to its cooperation with China on the economic front. For instance, very recently, METI and MOFA has concluded a joint memorandum with its Chinese counterpart on business cooperation in third countries with China. JETRO also has a new Japan-China Third Country Market Cooperation Forum, which basically tries to cooperate with China on various economic issues. At the same time, there's always this little bit of a schizophrenic nature within Japan's China policy. For example, one of the LDP study groups have recently published a policy recommendation basically calling for the establishment of the National Economic Council to deal with Chinese economic statecraft. This proposal is based on the perception that Japan does not have a central institution that can effectively deal with various forms of economic statecraft being engaged by China, whether trade practices or investment or foreign aid, cybersecurity issues, and whatnot. So to conclude, Japan, the US, and other like-minded countries must continue to engage in consultation with each other to really strike out the right balance on how to deal with China, not to antagonize them too much, but also make sure that we have to be careful that China will not take hegemony of this region. Thank you.
Three, I think, excellent presentations with which we can begin our conversation. And I would note that I hope we have in the remaining, about 15 minutes, I guess, an actual conversation about these issues. If I may, implicit in, I think, the presentations that we just made, is that there's 650 million people in Southeast Asia, considered to be the real dynamo, the real engine of the global economy. That's where much of the growth is, where it has been, and where it's projected to be. Critical to the sustained growth of that region, I think, and of the world, is this notion of connectivity, how the pieces fit together, both within Southeast Asia as a region and the external actors that we've been referring to, that we referred to, the United States, Japan, Australia, China, India, how they engage with this region, how they connect to it. And the key modes and methods of that connection, which is what we were talking about in our conference over the last day and a half, were infrastructure investment, financial investment, but in the field of infrastructure. If you will, the real key connection point. Energy, which is Jane's specialty, about which she spoke, I think, at length. And then about the digital component of all this, which is both the digital infrastructure, the key technologies that both bring the world closer together and facilitate so much of the economic dynamism. And yet, at the same time, there's a security component, given the centrality of these technologies to the efficient and functioning of societies. So how is it that we both make those connections and ensure that they're safe at both ends, if you will, of the digital connections? I mean, what we've been trying to examine, I think, in the whole concept of a free and open Indo-Pacific, and frankly that of the Belt and Road Initiative, is an attempt to connect all the various pieces together in ways that benefit not only the recipients, if you will, the actors that receive the money and make the intended targets, but also the countries that are giving money, the donors too. And we want to identify, or hopefully come up with strategies in which all of the participants are able to benefit together. That there are no externalities, and importantly, that there are no, if you will, winners and losers in what is emerging, however, as a competition, a notion that there are in fact countries that will be better served by this process. At the same time, and I think you heard particularly in Akira's last remarks, the idea that there is a competition between particularly the United States and China, as articulated in the national security strategy, and between China and like-minded countries in the West where there are different values, there are different interests, there are different concerns that may well be in competition. And yet, the fact is that the stakes are huge and that no country, no set of countries can really address these on their own. There need to be cooperative solutions to the problems that we're addressing. So at some point, a zero-sum competitive mindset probably gets in the way of the larger ambitions and goals that we have. Striking the appropriate balance between cooperation and competition is the key task. I offer you that as a way of framing the conversation that I'd like to have now. So, it's your turn. What I'd ask, we're going to have a question and answer session. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand elsewhere. Identify yourself. Identify who you would like to ask. If you want to direct a question to someone, you don't have to. You can speak in English or in Japanese. Please do not make a question or comment longer than any of the speeches. And finally, there are several people in the audience I know that were at the conference today, and just because you're not up here on the dais does not mean that you cannot weigh in with your thoughts and comments as well. So with those, by introduction, I need a microphone up front, please. And do I have more than one question? I'm happy to take several at a time. Can you raise your hand again for the microphone? Great. Please.
Thank you very much. This is Yasuno Musato, Professor of University of Tokyo. Thank you very much for excellent speech. My question is very simple. The matter of the governance and rule of law, because I'm a law professor. And in fact, I worked for United Nations in the Cambodia peacekeeping operation, and also working EBRD European Bank for rule of law project in the former Soviet Union and so on. From that background, my question is, when we will join the AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, yeah, because US and Japan is still away because of the governance. So the last year I had a visit from the General Counsel of the AIIB with my former colleague of EBRD. So they're working for governance issues anyway. It's a schema X. In order to just facilitate this, then we have to also be a partner of China for this more improving the situation. Otherwise, just zero-sum game, as you said. In fact, in Cambodia, we are very concerned about the recent setback of the kind of a Chinese model. Or even Myanmar is on the way now again to take advantage of the Chinese sort of ambition there. So what do you think of this kind of governance issue, especially for the AIIB? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else like to add? You can take a couple of questions before we go to say the answers. Sir, Stephen Nanji, who was also at our conference.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen Nagy from International Christian University, and I'm a visiting fellow at JINA, Japan Institute for International Affairs. So my question is revolving, who are the stakeholders in the Indo-Pacific, or FOA? Is Russia part of this game? Where are the Pacific Islands? Because in our discussions, we didn't talk about Russia. We didn't talk much about South Korea. We didn't talk that much about India. So, what is the limits of our stakeholders in terms of the free and open Indo-Pacific? And can you shed some light on the particular roles that you may understand those stakeholders in terms of providing some real takeaways, some real goods to the free and open Indo-Pacific? Thank you.
Good. Happy to take another question if we have one. Back here, please.
失礼しました。荷物が多くて、ありがとうございます。朝日新聞の小野と申します。 私は中野さんとユー・ウィンさんに質問があります。2つ質問があってですね、1つはそれぞれのお国でそれぞれアメリカ、ベトナムの皆さんがどう考えているかというのは、日本で東京電力の福島第一原発の事故がありました。で、現在もこの事故の後の処理がまだ終わっていません。これについてベトナムでまたアメリカで、国の皆さんたちがどういうふうに受け止めていらっしゃるか、今現在、全く考えていらっしゃらないとか、もう関心ありませんよっていうことかもしれませんけど、どんなことがあるかを教えていただきたいのと、あともう一つですね、現在日本ではその原発、原子力エネルギーをですね、まだ使っていこうとしています。で、中野さんはエネルギー政策を専門というふうに伺ったので、この日本の原子力を使っていこうというエネルギー政策をどういうふうに評価されますか。また、ユー・ウィンさんにはちょっとご専門分野と違うかもしれませんが、同じくこの日本の原子力エネルギー政策をどういうふうにご覧になるか教えていただけないでしょうか。
Thank you very much. Three very discrete questions. I think we're going to go back to our panelists. I think in terms of the first question, Professor Sato, about the AIB, we can take both Akira and Jane. And I would remind again, and to repeat Mike's comments earlier, we are all here courtesy of the State Department, U.S. Embassy, the United States government. None of us speak for any of those institutions, nor even for the institutions with which we are affiliated. So the opinions that they offer you, particularly about the advisability of, say, joining AIIB, are just personal. So with that, why don't we start, Jane? You want to take the first whack at a couple of those?
Thank you so much. These are excellent questions to start with. I'm not a finance specialist, but certainly, I mean, AIIB, I think, aims to certainly fill this vast needs for investment, infrastructure needs in many parts of the world. And as, if I'm not mistaken, I think there is already quite a bit of cooperation between AIIB and ADB, where the current head of AIIB used to be number 2 at ADB. So there's a lot of exchange of, I guess, expertise, views between the two leaders and two institutions. So it could actually then certainly evolve if the environment may become much more conducive and perhaps appropriate for both Washington and Tokyo to comfortably sign up. But I'm not quite sure if we're there yet. At the same time, though, I think you're right that there is something to be said about being inside the organization to be able to have effective voice. So what the European colleagues have been doing by joining, I think, I definitely think there's been value. So hopefully, hopefully there'll be better appreciation for the intent, as well as like any specific functions of these institutions, so that there'll be there might be sort of the comfort level where I guess for Washington and Tokyo to re-examine their positions if they want to, as appropriately. Russia, India, Korea, I agree, Stephen. I mean, Korea came up a little bit. My sense is that I think FOIP could be and should be inclusive, but the countries that could be part of this have to be like-minded. It's probably a bit of a stretch to be asking all these other countries to be also liberal democracies. But as long as these governments are willing to recognize there is sort of common goods to be sort of create it and also perhaps promote it by joining, whether it's sea lane protection or there are many other features beyond energy, digital, etc. But I think being inclusive should make it a lot more appealing. And to some extent, the work is then on these governments to figure out what they want out of it, but they can never say that they weren't invited. And to your pair of questions about Fukushima, the U.S. reaction, obviously, it's not a monolithic society, as you know, a lot of the different people have very different strong opinions in the U.S. society, but I think in general, Fukushima, the Fukushima-led supply shortage issue, was well covered back then. I think more recently, I think the focus has been much more about how can the U.S. learn about lessons learned by Japan in terms of the safety features, how to design the power plant, etc. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission, NRC, has been actively incorporating these lessons, but but there has not been the type of sort of anti-nuclear massive shift that we saw in Germany, for example, immediately following Fukushima. In part, perhaps because there's no perfect fuel for electricity. Everything comes with the risk, and to some extent, I think we also realize that nuclear is essentially zero carbon emitting source of energy. In more recent years, there are many more environmental organizations within the United States that used to be quite skeptical about the role of nuclear in the U.S. energy mix, but now much more forward-leaning on the role that the nuclear may play, just because if you look at IPCC report, if you look at all these different reports, whether it's International Energy Agency, Outlook, as the business as usual just doesn't get us to where we need to be as the global community to help address the climate change challenge. So it's not to say that people, in the US, a lot of environmental organizations are just promoting nuclear. It's just that it's much less, perhaps, if I may say so, much less emotional in terms of discussion in the US, and it's very much part of mainstream energy policy and climate policy debate in the US. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very good questions. The first one, I would like to say about Vietnam perception about market relationship with other countries. Just look at the situation of Vietnam in the mid-1980s. At that time, the main supporter of Vietnam is the Soviet Union and socialist country. But at that, those countries were collapsing. At that time, we were still under war with China. So the war with the US just ended for 10 years. And the war with France, and we still have problems with Japan, yes, in the past. So what would Vietnam do at that time? So just look at that. I think if we just keep in mind that because we never lose in any war, but we still consider those big guys, still our enemies. We still, yes, move to somewhere else, not on our earth. So that is the Vietnam, yes, viewpoint is simple. Especially with the US, the difference is huge. But we need to normalize the relationship with the US. We try to put some sensitive issue aside. For example, just I think the issue is last for a long time. The orange agent. It's last for a long time, just recently, right? The evidence and the confess that I think that's caused a lot of problems. But that issue we cannot raise in the late 1980 and early 1990. And a lot of other issues, sensitive issues, we put aside. And then we try to find some way, some good one to go ahead. For example, it's my institution. At that time, we call Fulbright Economics Teaching Program. So that is because everything, the normalization between Vietnam and US is so sensitive. Education should be the best. And at that time, basically, some people from the US come to Vietnam just teach some typical market economy. No mention about Vietnam anywhere, because at that time it's really sensitive. But gradually, right now, our institution, we got Fulbright University Vietnam, we may be a half loved by the government and a half disliked by the government, because we are so fun. But the government needs the very clear, I think, very constructive criticism or something like that. So that is a very good model. Or a lot of things, if you look at the situation, what I think Vietnam government have done with other countries, especially if you look at the relationship between Vietnam and Japan, it's really good. So if we look at that situation, gradually we know that there are a lot of differences. But I think we can shorten the gap to build the trust and for the development of Vietnam. And if you look at the situation in Vietnam, right now we still a developing country, but we still have a role in the world. If you look at the second summit, what happened in Vietnam? That happened in Vietnam is there. Not at the end, the Professor Graham Linson from Harvard, he mentioned that no announcement or no joint statement, it not mean that fail, but it means that two sides become closer and maybe good result could be happen in the future. So that we just look at that role and that Vietnam do. We just look ahead and look forward instead of just reconsidering a lot of problems happened in the past. So I think that one thing we mentioned in the forum that if I think some rich countries like the US, Japan and other advanced countries want other countries to follow or to on that side, I think should let those countries become better, become push less and encourage more. So that is the one that is from my view for the question about the nuclear energy. I think that there are two things. If we develop nuclear energy for social activity, it would be good. But there are two sides, right? If the capacity to build nuclear energy, it's simple to turn it become nuclear weapon. We know that right now, if the stock of nuclear weapon in our Earth, it's over enough to destroy the whole world. So we have to prevent any country in the world to develop nuclear weapon. Or we should have some way to control the nuclear weapon. Energy, it should be fine, but I think there are some side effects, so we should consider about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Kira, as you answer, I'd be interested, particularly as you were comparing views of the free and open Indo-Pacific, how India is thinking with this fits in regard to Stephen's question about the stakeholders.
First of all, I want to take on Saba's question. I think Jane answered the question very well, so I want to reply to the comment from a different angle. So the lending capacity of AIIB is supposed to be around $10 to $15 billion a year, and if you look at the first 2 years or so, they only lended about less than half of that, like $4.4 billion. The BRI is projected to be about $1 to $8 trillion per year. So I would say that whether the question of should we enter AIIB is not negligible, but I do want to post this fact that what we're talking about here is 10,000 times the amount and to see. I will get to the India part, but you talked about Russia provoking India, but you didn't cover the Pacific Islands, so I want to address that first. I think the Pacific Islands is becoming the new battleground for PRI versus FOIP, if you will. Southeast Asia is of course a battleground, but now I think everyone is talking about how can we help these Pacific Islanders. And I think it is important. We have Chinese companies, especially telecommunication companies like Huawei, going in to build their telecommunication infrastructure, both hardware and software, into these countries. But then again, I think that resources are limited, and if we think strategically, we really have to think about how to prioritize certain lendings and how much effectiveness that giving these investments to an island of a population of, let's say, a couple thousand people is, whether that's effective or not, is a question that we have to ask ourselves. And if we are going to say, yes, we are going to make substantial investment into these islands, then we have to make sure that we have good reasons for doing so. India, I think, is a very interesting case because I think it's both a partner of the Indo-Pacific vision, and it's also a target for some of the investments as well. I was in New Delhi a couple of weeks ago to participate in a conference there, and I mean, to be honest, it was my first time to be there, but I was actually surprised that even within New Delhi, the infrastructure is still not, let's say, it wasn't as good as Tokyo or New York. Of course, India is interesting because they say that they do buy into the concept of the Indo-Pacific, but they also want to make sure that it is not a concept of anti-China containment strategy. So I think with regards to India, the important point is that we cooperate where they can, and then we try and entice them so that they cooperate more and more. But for now, I mean, if you look at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website, they actually have all of these nice maps showing Japan's 150 initiative, and it shows that they are already doing a lot in India with regards to its investment in infrastructure. So yes, India, we have to both cooperate and make it a target for investment.
Good. Thank you very much. Go back to the floor now, take some more questions. All right, sir, 1, 2. Begin with the gentleman on the aisle.
Thank you very much. I'm Hiroshi Yamazoe, International Relations Researcher at the National Institute for Living Studies. I'd like to ask Jane Nakano about the meaning of the newer U.S. energy initiatives and the FOIP in terms of countering China's Belt and Road initiative and other initiatives by China. I read your commentary called Energy Opportunities and Free and Open Indo-Pacific Vision, and I listened to the today, but I'm still wondering what would be the consequences if it were not for the U.S. newer energy initiatives. So is that without, if the U.S. didn't start this newer initiative, energy strategy, what would happen in the Pacific region or some the U.S. interests? Is that the loss for the U.S. of the energy market or energy access to critical infrastructure to the energy transportation infrastructure, or generally diplomatic loss of diplomatic influence? I'm wondering this meaning.
Jane, can I also ask you, there's a gentleman had his hand up over there, and while we're, yes, please. While you're preparing, I'd be curious, Jane, in your presentation yesterday, yesterday, it's been a long 2 days. If you talked about the evolution of the energy market and of the U.S. role in that market, in the way it's becoming a net exporter, and I'm wondering if you could sort of explain to the audience the way that this global energy market is evolving,
particularly the U.S., and perhaps what some of the implications of that might be. Sir.
My name is Hiroshi Tu, and I'm a member of America-Japan Society, and I have a small company in Tokyo. We're kind of distributor of electric wires and cables for audio-visual equipment manufacturers and car makers and the PC makers, something like that. In 1985, we went out of Japan to establish the factories in Singapore, Taiwan, Malaysia, Indonesia, and China, and at the same time in Mexico and US. And my question is for Jane and Yuan, and I think I'm getting old, but I think from now on, our company has the second movement to go outside of Japan. And in this situation, it's a very, very private question, but energy point of view and the political point of view, which country I should go next step?
Political consulting or economic and business consulting advice is not free. You can make a donation either to the U.S. Embassy Public Fund or any of our organizations. And I would also just take issue that for someone who's in a small company, it sounds like you got a lot of business. Can we take one more question from the audience before I go back to the crowd? Someone? Mike? Oh, tell you what, let's go to the Maya-san first if you don't mind. And Mike, we can go back. We can take 4. Promise not to ask a trick question.
Thank you so much. I'm Kobayashi from the Institute of Energy Economics of Japan. My question is somehow related to the last question. But we know that Indo-Pacific is not Asia-Pacific. It means that we should expand the view of the concept or strategy beyond Asia. And I think we all remember that it was in Kenya that Prime Minister Abe has mentioned about free and open Pacific at first time in 2016. So it means that we should involve or engage to the Middle East or Africa. But how can I say, the discussion is not always sufficient. We always stop in the age of Asia. So how we could expand the view and how we can, how can I say, engage or involve the Middle Eastern or African countries, which are not always like-minded and also liberal and democratic. And in some area, China is becoming dominant day by day. This is a question for Jane and if possible for Akira. Thank you.
Great. Let's pass the mic, and while we're contemplating that, Yuan, I'd like you to ask, well, first I would add to that, as you hear people in the United States, Tokyo, Washington, and Canberra talk about an Indo-Pacific, what is the Southeast Asian view? Is that a good thing? Would you rather talk about the Asia-Pacific or ASEAN? How does that concept sound to Southeast Asian ears? And then Akira, I guess if I would ask if you could, in addition, sort of provide some of the backdrop, or the background to Kobayashi-san's question, which is sort of why is Japan, at least, thinking about an Indo-Pacific? And Jane, you could perhaps offer a U.S. perspective because I'm not sure they match up. But I hate to get ahead of the story, but we'll say. Mike?
Yeah, so this question, I guess, builds on the last one as well. I've attended the conference for the past 2 days, and I've attended a number of these events on Indo-Pacific. Again, this is a personal view, but I wonder if you could speak to sort of the cooperation angle of that was raised during the meeting in terms of capacity building, because in my view, it's not quite zero-sum in the sense that, for example, you look at, for example, British railroad investments in the 19th century when the British Empire was rising, or when it was laying telegraph cables, as was discussed by one of our speakers, it led to a lot of network effects that were beneficial. So, yes, there may be a first mover advantage in that you're moving in, you're laying the cables, the 5G networks, the energy infrastructure, but that doesn't exclude necessarily other players from going in. I look at example of Mongolia in the mining sector. No one wanted to go into Mongolia, but the Chinese went in and Canada went in. And after that sort of developed, now you have a bunch of other countries considering sort of investments in sort of other industries. And likewise in Africa, a lot of countries avoid, and Central Asia, as the other person has mentioned. That trade network is huge. I think in Parag Khanna's latest book, he says, The Future is Asian, that it's 1.6 trillion in trade from Europe to Asia. From the US to Asia is about 1.2 trillion, and from the US to Europe is about 1.1 trillion. So the vast gravity of trade is from Europe through Central Asia to Asia, yet we so seldom focus on Turkey, for example, or Saudi Arabia, Iran, obviously there are sanctions, sensitivities, things like that, or even Russia, who is now, I think, the breadbasket for Asia. So Asia produces most of the wheat for Asia. So in terms of cooperation, not just being a first mover advantage, but also is there a last mover advantage as the conditions and the risk goes down. So if you could speak to the cooperation angle, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
To further complicate Mike's question, we're talking about digital infrastructure, and one of the presentations was about 5G. And one of the questions I think you'd ask is that when you're talking about huge investments of this nature, given the speed with which this technology is transitioning, does that in fact suggest more about letting other people be first movers or what have you? And I was reading the other day that there are researchers in Japan and Germany that are already working on the next, which I guess would be 6G technology for telecommunications that would be in place by 2030. And thus, is 5G yesterday's story, even though nobody's deployed it yet. So, with that, we'll go back to the panel. We'll start with Jane once again, please.
Sure. Thank you so much. Another round of great questions. So thank you for your interest in my work. The value of FOIP, whether there's sort of a new value added by this new strategy or vision, I think that's what I understand to be your question. I think some of these projects are probably something that both the U.S. and Japanese, or U.S. or Japanese companies may have been looking at for commercial reasons. But I think to some extent, FOIP is a very valuable organizing concept. It has a power of grouping together projects and in terms of the energy infrastructure projects, but then also perhaps some of the exports that could be really enablers for rule-based trade and investment. And in many ways, I'd say that at least for the past 6 years since Belt and Road was launched, the Belt and Road initiated by the Chinese government was launched. Many of us in the energy think tank world have written a number of short analytical pieces, trying to figure out and asking questions and giving credit where it deserves and etc. But that was just that. I mean, there was no sort of alternative way of looking at what's happening in the energy world. And also, I think that some of the more practical values is to give Southeast Asian or I guess Indo-Pacific economies the option. I think Igata-san has mentioned this, but without some sort of competing organizing notion, I wonder how much some of the regional leaders could have been vocal about their concerns about issues like debt trap, whether it's Malaysia or many other countries, because there was nothing to compare it against, right? Related to that, and I think that was one of the topics that Michael just brought up, but capacity building for that reason is an important one. Sort of share the U.S. and to some extent Japanese expertise in evaluating the commerciality and perhaps more, it could be more engineering based as well, the ability for these economies to judge which projects or which offer is more suitable for the national situation. I think the only concern there is, and this came up the last day and a half, is to make sure that it doesn't look self-serving. In other words, make sure that it's not like the Japanese and American lawyers and accountants and consultants going into these economies and just to promote our projects, or sort of tweaking the rules and tweaking the game, because I think we all have to be mindful of the reputational damage that may follow if we try to do that. For that reason, perhaps some of the regional organizations could look at way to multilateralize that sort of capacity building expertise. So that's one. And then you suggested I talk about the role of the U.S. in evolving energy market. Yes, the U.S. is forecast to become the net energy exporter quite soon. And I think it's certainly having more oil and gas to the global market helps many other countries, whether it's the strategic rival or not. I think it sort of benefits everyone and anyone. Energy is the lifeblood of the modern economy, so it has benefit for the entire society, but at the same time, it also, a little similar to what I said earlier, it also gives option to many countries that may have just previously had very dominant regional supplier, whether it's Russia, for example, or what it could be, for example, in Japan's case, Qatar. The issue isn't to displace these other suppliers, it's just having the bigger pool of suppliers. I think everyone could have a benefit from competition and also hopefully transparency. So there's that value. Where to go for the energy business? I guess just make it a little broader. So energy business, I think one of the challenges in some of the emerging sort of Indo-Pacific economies is the stability of policies, or the policy stability. So I think as you look at these economies, it really comes down to that. Like, does the given government have predictable path to more perhaps open or fair commercial framework? And then Kobayashi-san's question about the Asia Pacific, it shouldn't be conflated with Indo-Pacific. It's an excellent point. My understanding is that the Japan's definition of Indo-Pacific is more, the definition of Indo-Pacific more proactively looks at Africa and many others. I only sort of look at it mainly from an energy perspective. I don't think the U.S. version has that consideration yet. I certainly do not hear as much. So I think there's a definitional difference. But in many ways, I think that at least VoIP is a fairly new notion, and I think it's very much open for a lot of suggestions, if you will. But in many ways, the U.S. force projection is quite broad, and also Japan and U.S. industrial sort of appeal definitely can reach a lot of different economies and different models of economies around the world. So yeah, I think that's a very good point, but I probably...
And really quickly, where do you invest? Where do you put your Japanese businesses? Where do you put your next wave of businesses?
Oh, so that's why I said, I think, that's like, so you really have to review closely what sort of, the political, not political, so the does the government, whatever government in Southeast Asia or South Asia or perhaps Middle East, that do they give clear signal of where they want to head, where they're headed. I know. So, but yes, I agree with Brad. We're always welcoming new donors to the foundation. But that's a very good question. I'm sorry, I don't have specific sort of ideas, but.
My question is simple, Vietnam. No, I think this is because in Vietnam, if you want to make business with China, Vietnam should be the good choice. We are on the CTPP with 11 countries, and we are finalizing the negotiation with Europe to go for the new FTA. So I think Vietnam should be a good way and very good location. And connect to your question about the view of Asia for the broad picture. So just think about that. I think we should change the mindset. We shouldn't create the Cold War number 2 point. We shouldn't do that. But we should change the mindset. Just look the situation of ASEAN countries. We usually cannot have the joint statement in many meetings. This is why, because that is the conflict of interest. So somebody agree to sign and somebody not. Because I think the mindset, I think is still, right now, we got a choosing side. So it means that I think when the South China Sea happened, I think all countries have to criticize China, or to one side or the other side. That is conflict of interest. So in this case, instead of calling, I think, Southeast Asia, for example, at the battleground, we should call some kind of the market. That is the market China and the US try to get. So it means that if you think about the war, so it means the zero-sum game, one game and the other lose. But we think about the market or development. So two sides can compete together, but can create the value for those and for the other country. So that's why I think if you look at just a couple of days ago, right, Indonesia just I think finalized the project with China. And a lot of Southeast Asia countries still, I think, go with China. And we still go with the US and other countries just because our benefit. So if I think we look at that mindset, and if you want to look at, I think, try to convince other countries, especially I think the 10 of Southeast Asian countries, I think just look at the benefit. What benefit you bring for those countries, and what contribution for those countries to bring to the broader picture. So that is why I nailed Vietnam as a very good example. That to show that I think Vietnam get benefit from the open and fair, and the whole region I think get benefit from that one. So that is the win-win competition. Thank you a lot.
Thank you. Last word.
So, Mane-san, I completely agree with James' analysis, and I just want to add that yes, we do need to talk more about how to incorporate Middle East and East Africa into the Indo-Pacific strategy. And one way to do so, despite many of these countries here are not being let's say, not necessarily a like-minded country or not necessarily democratic, I think it is still possible to cooperate them in various ways, which goes to Mike's question on capacity building. Because we've already seen many cases where China has succeeded in, for example, getting the Port of Hambantota in Sri Lanka or Port of Plene in Greece, where they have basically been successful in acquiring certain strategic critical infrastructure like ports. And there are lessons that we can learn from here. For example, there are recently now many countries engaging in what might be called administrative capacity building or education for decision makers, telling them about what is a fair lending scheme, or just sending a bunch of lawyers and accountants in to review contracts through and give them the capacity to actually make sure that what deal they're getting into is not unfair to them. So I think that's one way we can cooperate, or at least one way we can partner up with these countries in the Middle East or East Africa to engage in administrative capacity building there. And then on the last note on 5G, with regards to digital infrastructure, I think that's one area where we might have to make a choice between the US and China. Because these telecommunication hardware and software these are huge investments. And once you go far away, you don't go back. I mean, the thing is that what I hear from many of my friends in US, Australia, Europe, working on cybersecurity is that if you're using Huawei infrastructure, then there is always a risk that all of the information that goes through it will eventually end up in the Chinese Communist Party. And if you're okay with that, and then I guess that's the choice you make.
Thank you very much. We are just about out of time. I want to thank you all for coming out to join us this afternoon. It's been I hope it's been a rewarding hour and a half. I want you to please join me in thanking our panelists for 3 great presentations. I, of course, want to thank both the U.S. Embassy, the Department of State, the U.S. government for supporting this program and all the programs they have in the past and all the programs that you will in the future in making this possible. It's been really it's been a pleasure working with Mike and his team and the rest of the public affairs staff. The folks at Pacific Forum, Jesslyn, who none of you know, but who have been absolutely essential to realizing this project, as well as Crystal, who was in fact, and still is, yes. They all deserve thanks as well. And finally, perhaps most importantly, thank you to the translators back and back who have always do a great job whenever I'm speaking. It's always a real assignment. Although I'm beginning to get the impression that Akira can challenge me for speed of speaking in English. But join me in thanking them for that. Mike, is there any last comments about future programs or anything else you would like to tell them, or T, or anything?
No, thank you for coming. May, we have a great slate of programs lined up on FDI, on U.S. Presidential primary election system, as well as programs Sure, so we have a great number of
They have a lot of great programs.
So thank you so much for coming, everybody. Just to give a quick plug to our upcoming programs. In May, we have a wonderful program covering FDI with a couple of interesting people, Uber Eats, along with Stripe, a payment company, discussing sort of US-Japan foreign direct investment in the Silicon Valley startup space. That's coming up. Also, we will be doing a series on the US presidential election system. So starting on May 13th, we'll have a speaker to cover the US primary and electoral college system. I know that will be of interest to a lot of the Japanese public here. So go on our website to stay tuned for upcoming programs. Thank you.
Thank you all.